can say that driving a Tesla or buying food from the farmer's market is enough and that we can just keep living our lives. What we have to do is look at what's actually happening, process it, feel the emotions, because the emotions are our motivation to do better and to actually change our lives and try to pursue the systemic change that we need to see.
On the surface, you might think, well, we'll just start calling spring February or whatever, but nature isn't that flexible.
So I think not just arguing about, polar bears and ice caps, but actually saying like, oh, well, these people and institutions who you really respect have been preparing for this. Why would they do that?
Of course, in the case of climate change, if the data and the conclusions are correct, by the time you notice it's time to cut your hair, it's already too late. Okay, welcome to another Kitchen Sink Microscopy. I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and we would love it if you'd like and share this video and subscribe to the channel.
Yeah, and I'm Casey Rochford, and don't forget to stick around to the end of the show because we write new songs for every show. Well, sometimes we recycle old ones, but don't tell anyone. So we are bringing on a guest tonight for a little chat about what's going on with the climate. This is a friend of mine, Anna Humphreys. Go ahead and say hi.
Hey, great to be here.
So you recently gave a talk was it at UW or?
No, it was in Portland. It was actually for the Northwest Climate Conference.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm a grad student right now. I'm studying, I just finished up my master's of social work and I'm finishing up public health this year. And I just applied for this conference kind of thinking that I'd get an abstract maybe in their like compendium. But I ended up being invited to speak, which was really surprising given that this was a conference of scientists and policymakers. And I was talking about feelings about climate change. So I was co-presenting with this other guy from Seattle. He's a therapist who specializes in eco-anxiety and grief. And we were like, okay, maybe there'll be like 12 people who show up at this talk. But it ended up being a totally packed room. And he talked about like the sort of harder stuff, some of the emotions that people are feeling, in the face of existential doom. But then I got to talk about the more hopeful aspects and also positive coping mechanisms. And I was really surprised to see people in the audience were crying and just really resonated with this. So that kind of clued me in that, okay, this is something that people are caring about on a larger level, and it's definitely worth addressing.
Huh. That's really cool because that's not like the first thing you think of when you hear climate change. Usually that's a very polarizing term where people instantly feel the need to jump into facts and say this is why it is happening or this is why the media is lying to us or whatever, and nobody really gets into the way it's impacting life in general. And I think that's a really interesting angle to take.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's a very personal angle for me. I always, I knew that it was happening. I mean, I've been a tree hugger since I was a kid. But I always thought that, there was some kind of like adults on this planet taking care of things, right? But I really started digesting it when I was thinking about having kids of my own, when I was engaged last summer to my now husband. And we were having all these conversations about, like, oh, these wonderful places that we'll take our kids and, how we'll explain the world to them and stuff. And then I just, over a couple beers one night, I had a really good conversation with my sister about what the future looked like. And she just asked, how can you think about having kids right now when climate change is at our front door? And that just sent me for this tailspin of emotion and grief and anxiety like I'd never experienced before in my life. Um, and at the time, I was actually working in maternal infant health, and that had been my background for the past like 6 years. And I was just like, oh my gosh, if I don't know how I feel about having kids of my own, how can I continue on this path? So that's when I really just decided to reframe what I was doing and go into looking at the intersection of public health and climate change, since I was already in a grad school program. And the more that I learned, I was learning about the facts and climate change and health and atmospheric science and all this, but what I wasn't hearing was how we cope with all of these horrible things that we're hearing about. I mean, occasionally at the end of the class, a professor would say, oh, this was a really heavy class, and people would like laugh about it. But that wasn't enough. I was hearing a lot of people having similar emotions. So that's kind of why I started presenting on this. And it's been really interesting to see people reach out to me and just say, hey, I'm going through this too. Like, let's talk about it. And for me, it's been the best way of coping, really. This and getting involved in activism. I don't think that there's any better way of feeling more empowered in this situation than reaching out, learning, and getting connected with communities. I mean, the facts are the facts. You can Google them. You should know by now that climate change is real. If you don't, I'm not going to try to convince you. It's out there. I'm not a scientist. Listen to the scientists. But when we're not actively coping with this crisis that we're facing, we can still disconnect. We can disassociate. We can say that driving a Tesla or buying food from the farmer's market is enough, and that we can just keep living our lives. What we have to do is look at what's actually happening, process it, feel the emotions, because the emotions are our motivation to do better and to actually change our lives and try to pursue the systemic change that we need to see to overcome these challenges of our time. We're not going to do any of that unless we're actually understanding how deep and how broad these problems are, and how they do implicate the way that we live our lives.
Yeah. Do you think that climate change deniers are having kind of an emotional response, like perhaps it's a defense mechanism, like they just don't want it to be true, so they're just fighting tooth and nail against accepting it as at face value? Or you
Yeah,
think
I
that
really do wonder that. I mean, I understand that, like, I have some friends in Iowa who just don't understand the difference between climate and weather. And, they see that they had a normal seeming summer, and that so climate change isn't happening. I think, in this education system and, with all of the conspiracy theories around science, I think that some people just truly don't believe that that climate change is happening, and that's not like their way of coping. But I do think that for a lot of people, they recognize that their lives, the way that they live their lives, including their careers, are being threatened. I've got a cousin who works at a fracked gas refinery in Texas, and he says, oh, well, natural gas is clean, so I'm actually, helping. And I don't know if he really understands you know, the facts behind the greenhouse gas emissions that natural gas contributes to our atmosphere. But I think that part of it could be just that he'll have to gain a whole new set of skills if he wants to really live his life like climate change is real. I think that what I find almost more interesting are the people who do acknowledge that climate change is real and just don't do anything about it. And I think part of that reason is because they're so comfortable in their day-to-day lives. I think specifically in Seattle, we see a lot of that, right? Like the tech workers who are highly educated, who listen to science, and who just think that Bill Gates is going to save the day, or Robert Downey Jr., whoever these people are out there saying like, oh, don't worry, I've got this. I can just, don't question the status quo, just keep things the way that they are. And, the grownups will take care of it. There are no grownups. We're the ones. And it's hard to take responsibility, but we got to do it.
That's a good point. I would doubt that most people on either side of this discussion have actually read any scientific papers on the matter. You know, I've attempted to read a couple. It's kind of very, it's a
Dry.
daunting, yeah, it's very dry. Yeah, exactly. But, you know, I think they should. But what do you think we should, how do we approach people who don't believe that this is going on? And how do we lead them to understanding? You know, because currently there's a lot of ad hominem and name calling, yelling and screaming and stuff like that. And I don't know that that really does the movement any uh, justice. It doesn't seem to me like a good way to go about things. So how do we actually?
The
Uh,
hamster wheel.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a great question, and something that, you know, I think a lot of people are trying to figure out right now. But some of the most compelling arguments that I've heard are looking at the perspective of the person who is arguing against you and thinking, what do they trust, and what do they, you know, what institutions do they have faith in? And the US military has been preparing for climate change for decades. They've been moving their bases away from the coast. And they've been, you know, placing their soldiers in, you know, positions that um, that will be ready for food insecurity and water insecurity and all of these things that were associated with the climate crisis. ExxonMobil has known that this was coming since the 1970s, as we're seeing right now. Um, so I think not just arguing about, you know, polar bears and ice caps, but actually saying like, oh, well, these people and institutions who you really respect have been preparing for this. Why would they do that? And
Yeah,
yeah,
and because I think for a lot of people looking, just kind of observing, looking around in their daily life, they don't see any differences. So, you know, in their mind, there's nothing wrong. They're, you know, what's there's no clear indication that something's happening. So I think a lot of people are kind of hesitant to accept the narrative that there's, you know, that climate change is actually going on. um, and so because it would be a little bit difficult to convince somebody, because a lot of people, you know, you want to point to something and say, well, this is why, and that kind of thing. But if you don't have that, you just have a bunch of data and studies and boring stuff. Most people aren't going to jump on board with that, and it's not a big motivator to most people to do anything.
Yeah, that's why I try to come across with like an analogical reasoning. You know, I try, like if what you said, you know, you don't really notice the small changes in the climate because, you know, it's pretty gradual. And I mean, I would just equate that to like you don't see your hair grow, but at some point you're like,
Hmm.
well, it's time for a haircut, or you know, I need to shave my beard or something. You know, it's not something that you see happening, but as you go on through your daily life, eventually you look and notice, oh, hey, here's something that cropped up that I
Yeah,
didn't.
but then of course, in the case of climate change, if the data and the conclusions are correct, by the time you notice it's time to cut your hair, it's already too late.
Yeah,
You know, so
yeah, we're pushing hippie locks at this point.
I'm getting pretty scraggly.
yeah, yeah. I've been kind of skeptical of the whole thing for various reasons, but you know, I'm a big environmentalist, like very much uh, try to take care of the world around me, the planet, things like that, and I think everybody else should do the same. Um, but I think it is really hard for people that you approach them with this idea, and there's nothing concrete to show them, and I think that, especially to me, what I think is probably the biggest problem is the proposed solutions, which you know, I could go on and on about that. I got a lot of ideas on that, but I think some of the proposed solutions definitely trouble people,
Mhm.
and they're so big and monumental that I think people are resistant to accepting them. You know,
I see a lot of that, and you know, I think that we have been allowed to access a level of comfort that the human species has never known,
yeah,
which, you know, we've gotten really used to. We've gotten really soft and like just, you know, really carefree. But the fact is that that's not contributing to us being particularly healthy or happy. I mean, the US life expectancy has been going down. We live almost 4 years less than any other country in the industrialized world. And depression, anxiety, suicidality have been rising in recent years. So I think that what we're seeing is that these things aren't working, and also that literally anything that we do, any kind of consumption, has ramifications the world around. So yeah, it's going to be really hard to get people out of their comfort zones, but I think that maybe we weren't meant to live this way. And maybe we are wired for less of an individualistic society and more of a communitarian. Um, Disaster tends to unite people and bring out altruism and generosity and community sensibility. And that's where I find a lot of hope, is that, yeah, we're going to have to sacrifice some things. Not everybody's going to want to do it. But, you know, once we start to move into that greater, a sense that we are all connected, and that's, you know, from a factual standpoint, you know, everything that we do affects everybody else and every other living being. um, I think that that will make life a lot more meaningful and a lot more fulfilling, and probably make us healthier people ultimately. And I just want to, you know, circle back to people not seeing climate change happening in front of their very eyes. That's people in the privileged, industrialized Western world. People are losing their land across the world. People are experiencing larger natural disasters. And the people at the front lines of this are people of color, indigenous communities, and people with pre-existing health vulnerabilities. So to say, you know, it's just really unfortunate that the people who can deny that climate change is happening are the people who are in the privileged countries, um, you know, the people who don't necessarily have to engage, but have the power to do so and to actually make change.
yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because I think, you know, in first world nations, we could probably mitigate almost every change that occurs, because we have the technology and the industrial uh, capability, but we're not the ones that are going to really be affected by that. I mean, there's a lot of people who can't do that. So, you know, it's a good point that, because yeah, I think, ooh, man, that is a really, that's heavy. But
There are things, if you look hard enough, that I think anyone will be able to notice, and that's just like, you know, spring is coming a little sooner, winter's coming a little soon. You know, like the seasons are shifting, and you know, on the surface, you might think, well, you know, we'll just start calling spring February or whatever, but nature isn't that flexible. There are flowers that are beginning to bloom and pollinate before bees have come out of their hibernatory stages. So these flowers lose their opportunity to become pollinated. The bees lose their opportunity to get food sources and things like that. And you get this synergistic split, where you've got two species now that are suffering as a result of a seasonal shift. And you know, that's just one of many examples of the impact that you can kind of see if you just stop and smell the flowers.
it's subtle though, and I think that's what is difficult for people to wrap their heads around, that the changes are not clear. You know, it's a long-term kind of trend, and so I think people are less inclined to notice those kinds of things, or even to look for those kinds of things. um, but that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. It's like as long as we've got enough food and water, we can pretty much excuse anything else. And here in Washington, we are going to remain fairly comfortable. I mean, snowpack's going to go down massively, and we will experience some water shortages, but we'll probably be safe and comfortable enough, especially as compared to the rest of the world. Um, I heard something that made me really sad, which is that the western red cedars and Douglas firs are probably going to go extinct here, because we are going to, the water shortages will be enough to impact them. And that's something that we really place a lot of our identity on out here, these big evergreen forests. It's not going to look like that anymore. But I, I heard something about like every we only miss things up to like 5 years ago. So we're, when people are looking at the forests and they've changed, they'll eventually grow used to it. They won't really miss it so much, but there's going to be really so much ecological richness missing. Our children aren't going to know to recognize that. It's almost like we've got, what we have these days is just going to be the stuff of legends. Coral reefs, like how could we ever describe those to our children? That diversity, the colors, the animals, that feeling of wonder when you see it. People aren't even going to know what they're missing, and that to me is really, really sad.
Yeah, let's hope none of those things ever go away. I mean, I think there's still time.
Coral reefs don't have a great chance.
I think we're an ingenious species, and yes, we could do a lot of harm, but I think we can also rectify that if we put our heads together. And like you said, disaster brings people together, and we could do amazing things. And I really do have hope in that regard. I think, we've come a long way from the days of just dumping toxins into rivers and, just killing all the buffalo and doing all this stuff. We actually, things have improved, at least in the US. And I think it's, yeah. And the important thing is to spread that to the rest of the world. Cause I know that, we're okay here in this country as far as our impact to the planet. But there's other places like China and India that are doing a lot of damage as they grow.
Right.
How do we reach them?
But who are they producing for?
Well,
I mean,
that's a good point. Yeah.
So it's not like we are absolved of anything just because we can't see it, just because it's not happening in our backyard anymore. I mean, there are mountains of electronic waste in China that are, children are mining those for the little bits of gold, causing horrible health repercussions for them. And that's for us.
Yeah,
so
the environmental impact of processing that waste is awful, and I think people need to be a little bit more conscious of what they do. Try to use things as long as you possibly can. That's what I do.
Yeah.
I extend the life of everything as long as I possibly can. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, that kind of thing. I think that's a good way to live, but maybe I'm only one person in that regard,
Like a lot of these subtle changes that people may or may not see and think, well, that's just a subtle change. We could probably fix that. We're able to fix a lot of things. We're able to save certain species from extinction and stuff. While all that's true, every one of these things has a butterfly effect that reaches out in ways that maybe you're not seeing. And what that ultimately equates to is you've got a boat with a bunch of little holes in it, and you've only got 2 fingers, so you can plug these 2 holes, but you've got leaks, springing up left and right all around you. And it's because you didn't do it quick enough, basically.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, everything is kind of interconnected. Man,
Yeah.
what do you think we should? Oh, okay, well, no, that's a huge question. What should we do about it? I mean, I think that's that's its
That's
own
broad.
episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I think that there is, a generalized answer to that, and that is that we need system change. I mean, we can't continue to produce and consume and extract like we have been. We've been treating this planet as if it is just something that is a commodity and something that we can just take and take and take from. And that's wrong. I mean, we are seeing that in the repercussions that it is having, the fact that our planet is fighting us like we're a virus, because that's how we've been behaving when, indigenous communities have been living in symbiosis with the land for eons before we came and wrecked everything, in this country in the last 150 years or so, since the industrialized revolution. I think listening to indigenous knowledge is a really big one of how to interact with the land. Now, yeah, we are a whole lot of people at this point, and we're going to, we live in a really complicated society, but we do have a lot of sustainable technologies available, and we have a lot of forces of power that are so heavily invested in the economy the way that it behaves right now that we can't have any of these technological solutions until we address the system that has allowed people like Trump and Bolsonaro to come into power. I mean, it's not just the US. Authoritarianism is on the rise all over the world, but we're also seeing some pretty massive citizen revolts. I mean, I was reading that Haiti has been revolting for weeks now. Chile, I mean, I think Chile is going to be a really example of what can happen when citizens really protest things that, we're experiencing here in the US. I mean, they've got a wealth gap similar to ours. They don't have enough medical insurance, and they're, they've been upheld as a nation that has everything, while the workers have been suffering. So I see a lot of civil unrest that it really needs to happen right now, and that's happening in America, but not on a large enough scale. What we really need to do is take to the streets and institute policy change, vote the right people into power, yada yada yada, but also just reconsider letting capitalism be the ruling force of this planet.
Yeah. Ooh, wow. That was a pretty pretty amazing statement there.
Small to-do list.
Yeah, yeah. There was a few things that came to mind when you were saying what you said. I think I don't necessarily think that industrialization is all that bad on its own, like inherently.
No.
But I do think there is, or there has been, this kind of belief that we have limitless resources, like you're saying, just mine everything, dig holes, pull up all the resources. There is actually a limit, and we can have an effect on this planet. Like we have to be aware of that. And I think it's important that people be conscious of that. And, we're that, oh man. Okay. Casey, go ahead.
Yeah. I really agree with what you're saying about having to have this change be an effect from the systemic level, because while sometimes boycotts work, like say, like banning straws or whatever is like, that's great for the sea turtles and stuff like that, and I'm all for that, but it's not really going to fix the environment. All the small things that we do, it's good to do, but it, here's an example. Everyone I've ever met literally says, I will never eat veal, but they're still making veal, and so there's really only so much impact that supply and demand really has when you try to change the demand. It really does have to come from above. There has to be somebody that says, look, things need to change. This is how we're going to change it. Things have to be structured. Otherwise, the government is basically trying to herd cats. If you don't build them confined spaces to to shunt them into where they need to go, they're just going to go all over the place.
Right.
So, we definitely need regulatory measures in order to affect change quickly enough.
But then, you have to consider who creates those regulatory measures and how do we know that they're the right ones?
Well,
that is a huge problem right there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to be skeptical of anything, though, it would be to be skeptical of why things are the way they are now. It's like, oftentimes conspiracy theorists say follow the money, but when it comes to climate change, they don't seem to want to follow the money because all the money says big oil just wants to make money. That's the only reason that we're still doing things the way that we are when we've got the technology to do things much cleaner.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of that, I'm going to bring up something that's highly controversial, but to me, I think is actually like the thing we should be focusing on, and that's nuclear power.
Oh yeah.
Like, it's actually not that bad if you look into it. Like that is really, people talk about wind and solar, like, and those are fine, but if we actually want, to have a drop-in solution that doesn't have an environmental impact, that can actually make a difference right now, all we have to do is build more nuclear power plants. I mean, France is like almost 100% nuclear, and they're doing okay. They haven't like exploded or been irradiated or anything. It's actually not that bad, and it is a very safe, very environmentally friendly power source. Probably a lot more so than any of the other proposed things like wind and solar. And
Right.
and I think it's just like people have this knee-jerk reaction thinking about Chernobyl and stuff and think that it's bad. And no, it's good. That is the thing we should be doing. We have to pressure the NRC to release that restriction on building nuclear power plants in the US, and we'll be good.
Yeah, well, yeah, the Titanic sank, but we still use boats. So, like, if Chernobyl happened like once, and Fukushima or whatever, like those are two instances. I mean, here in Washington, we had Hanford or whatever.
Hanford.
Hanford's different.
I think the interesting thing about like this whole solar and wind power revolution is that people don't talk about where we're getting the materials for all of this, for all of these solar panels and wind. And it's going to require tremendous amounts of cement and tremendous amounts of steel, as well as rare earth minerals that are found in places like Chile and the Amazon and Australia, that will devastate the communities that are already there.
When you look into it,
requires almost no mining. We just have to really make sure to have a plan for what to do with that waste. And right now that's putting that in the underground salt layer, I think. And it can just stay there for a really long time. So yeah, I'm for nuclear, but there is definitely this stigma around it that's going to be hard to dispel.
Well, and I think a little bit of R&D put into what to do with the waste, we might actually find uses for it or something.
That'd be great. Better
ways of managing it, but we haven't built a new plant since either the 70s or the 90s or something. I think we should be, because I think, well, here in Washington we have a couple of dams and stuff, and those are okay. I guess they're technically green, but they do harm the ecosystem.
Yeah, hydroelectric dams really aren't all that they're cracked up to be. I was reading the other day that they, a bunch of biomass accumulates and it produces methane, which it lasts in the air for like 80 years and is a lot more harmful than carbon when it's there. Although it's shorter life. So they're not all that great, and they're also contributing to loss of salmon and loss of orca.
Exactly.
And they're also not going to be that great when we're experiencing droughts too. So
good point.
There's just no easy solution.
I mean, I think nuclear is probably the best one. I mean, right now we only have fission reactors, but if we develop fusion, well, there you go.
Right.
Problem solved. The waste problem is taken care of. And that's on its way. But in the meantime, I think fission reactors are actually not a bad way to go. Because the thing is, you don't have to change the power grid. You could just put a reactor wherever, and they're tried and true. Like we know how to work them. Unlike wind and solar, they don't require a vast amount of resources like real estate to be covered up with solar panels or windmills or anything like that. There's no batteries necessary, because the battery side of things is a big problem that everybody seems to ignore, but that's a big deal, because wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't always shine. So what do you do at night?
Right.
So yeah, I think I think that would be a good way to go. I mean, then it comes down to the individual sorts of things. Like we should, as people who care about the planet, be trying not to use as much, not buying all this stuff and not throwing things away all the time. Try to reuse things. I have a compost bin that I built myself. My trash can that I put out last Sunday, it was like a third full. Like, I don't even generate any trash because I'm careful about it, and it's not even that much effort. That's the thing. It doesn't even take that much effort. You just gotta think about it a little bit.
Well, and in the city, like Seattle and Tacoma, all that stuff is pretty possible to do. They make it pretty easy to separate waste, and they provide compost services and stuff. Out where I live, which is a little further from the city, I basically just have trash and recycle, and that's it.
Yeah.
So it's like you said earlier, it's kind of easy to think that, oh, the whole world must be doing this, but really when you get out into the rural areas, it's not available to them unless they like you did, like they make it themselves or something.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah, rural America just keeps getting screwed too, I mean, like 1631 out here in Seattle with the carbon tax, like that would have, benefited people in the city, and it would have made people in the rural areas just, pay more ultimately for their carbon emissions. So I think we really do have to consider like the social justice implications of things. I mean, yeah, like individual behaviors are really important, and also finding different sources of energy. But I see the climate crisis as such an exciting opportunity to address social injustices that have always existed and are just getting really really dredged up because of the current administration as well as the climate crisis. I mean, we're seeing that, like I mentioned, the frontline communities are the people who have always been getting screwed over: people of color, indigenous communities, people with pre-existing health complications. So I think when we talk about technological and individual solutions, like, why not dig deeper and talk about how to really address some of these giant inequities of our society? Like, if people on an individual level continue to just make their little small improvements, and yay, like meatless Mondays or whatever, but the rich are still flying around the world on a whim, and using their yachts and their cruise ships and stuff, like I mean, the military is a whole other thing. Like, it's the biggest environmental polluter on the planet, the US military is. So
yeah,
if they continue to do what they're doing, and they're going to continue to be on fossil fuels too, because all of this alternative technology is weak, then we're still going to have these problems. So I love the idea of like talking about the nuclear reactors and composting, and like, yes to all of that, but also our system has to change, and nothing besides the climate crisis would really make us look at that. So that's where I'm like, kind of hopeful. I've been enraged for pretty much my whole life, and now it's like, oh great, now it's valid, and other people are getting on board too. but I think that there is really this trap of like green consumerism that makes people feel like they don't need to get out on the streets. They don't need to contribute to systemic change because they're doing enough, and it's not going to be enough until we have changed the system in a way that I don't know what it's going to look like, because I don't have all the answers. But what it's going to take is collective action on a massive scale.
Yeah, that's a good point that I don't think people really are aware of. That, you know, you mentioned the idea that we're kind of all one people, and I think what you said does resonate. Like that they're interconnected, social things and environmental things, because they really are interconnected. And I think I do have a lot of hope. You know, maybe things will get worse before they get better, but maybe it'll push people to do more and care a little bit more and look out for their fellow humans. Hopefully, you
Oh
know.
yeah, I think so. And the planet too. I mean, I think we understand a lot more about the planet because we've destroyed it. Like I learned really well by making mistakes.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a good point. Yeah, and you know, people talk about the Earth dying or something like that, and I think, yeah, it's not really the Earth. The Earth is going to go on. It will survive. It's just going to kill us.
Yeah.
right.
It's the
And
Earth's ecosystem as we know it that's dying.
Yeah.
The chunk of rock will be fine for now.
And that really bothers me if people are like, oh, well, you know, humans can go, you know, we're not that great anyway. It's like, yeah, but we're going to take all of the other living creatures that have taken millions of years to evolve into these like beautiful states. Like, that's what really gets me. You know, we're not going to go down without a fight, and we're going to take everything down with us unless we shape up.
yeah,
And that to me is worth fighting for. Like humans, I mean, I think we've got some great potential, but I don't know if we're going to make it into that wonderful collective potential that we hold. But I sure think that it's worth trying.
yeah, I agree. And you know, we'll probably survive. We're survivors. Some of us will survive, but you know, assuming we don't nuke ourselves into oblivion in the meantime.
I would hope that you know, bringing it back around to your emotional angle, I would hope that the emotions lead to a breakdown in borders where we all understand that we need to work collectively as a human race, and people stop seeing color and people stop seeing borders for anything other than just a way of geographically explaining where something is, you know. uh,
Yeah.
it would be so great if we got to this Gene Roddenberry-esque kind of living, you know, where everyone's getting along and we work together for the good of humanity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one can only hope.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the space program did bring that a, a little bit closer. You know, we had the Cold War, and Russia and the United States. We went into space, and we looked at the Earth from a distance and realized, you know, this is all we have. And I think those people really saw something profound at that point. And I think everybody should appreciate that this is all we have. We're a tiny, tiny, tiny little stone in the middle of nowhere, floating around a fusion reactor in the middle of this galaxy. Well, not in the middle, but you know, at the outer edge of the galaxy. And you know, we're kind of alone.
Whoa,
And
whoa,
we got
whoa,
to take care
whoa.
of it.
We're not the center of the universe? What? Nobody told me this. Ah.
That's a
I mean,
different
we're supposed to
episode.
be.
Yeah. I want to take this opportunity because we're about like 40 minutes in. I want to mention something. There's a website, teamtrees.org, and
Trees?
Team Trees, yeah. And it's actually kind of a movement on YouTube. A bunch of big name YouTubers are kind of like bringing this in, and they're hoping to. They're partnered with the Arbor Day Foundation, and they're hoping to plant 20 million trees by 2020, or at least bring about the funding to do that. So if you donate to teamtrees.org, every dollar equals one tree.
Oh.
And I think that is awesome.
Wow.
And $1 is a tree. So everybody should put something. Everybody has $1 or 10 or whatever. Just
Yeah.
that's an awesome thing.
Yeah, there's this other I would hope that these two organizations are talking, because there's this youth-led one called Plant for the Planet. And we actually we donated all of our, like, what we would have spent on wedding gifts for people. We just donated to Plant for the Planet because it's such a noble cause, and like I love all of this youth-led stuff that's happening. And I think that at least some of the YouTubers that I've heard of that are all about planting trees, they're young, it's really kids that are leading this movement and so creatively doing it.
Yeah.
And that makes me really happy, these kids.
Oh
involved.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't know that anybody has the answer to what to do, but I think if you just give in to fear and give up, that's where things go wrong.
Mhm.
I think we should always lean towards hope and the idea that we could possibly solve this, because I
Right.
think we can. Like, I
Yeah.
think it is a solvable problem.
Yeah, and I think approaching it from many angles too. I mean, nuclear power, planting a bunch of trees, like, urban density, 5-minute neighborhoods, living roofs. Like the other day, I was up on like the 13th story of this building in Seattle, just looking out and thinking about how much more beautiful of a city it would be if we had rooftop gardens everywhere. I
Yeah.
feel like most of the solutions for climate change will also make it a more beautiful and just world.
That's a good point. And in fact, that actually goes back to the whole, how do you convince deniers? I think you don't have to. Just say, hey, this is a better way to do things.
mhm.
And it's actually, it's not bad. Like maybe that's the way to go. I
Yeah,
don't know.
like, have you seen there's like a meme going around that says, what if climate change is a hoax and we've accidentally made a more beautiful, just world? Like, oops.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yeah,
It's
we're not doing so hot right now.
yeah, like
Yeah.
when you boil it down, it's like you got these people fighting tooth and nail to keep things shitty. Really?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I love that argument that, like, the free market economy will figure itself out or whatever. It's like everything that we really rely on is subsidized, right? So why do we fear like the government stepping in and actually like funding things that are good for the planet rather than, fossil fuels?
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the idea of a Green New Deal a lot. And I've helped push a Green New Deal for Seattle because in our area, it's pretty possible that we could have the political power to really create some good changes. And we're also already on like 70% hydro. But on a nationwide level, like they're saying no nuclear. And I feel like that's, like pretty problematic. So I don't see any like giant policy solutions. I think that it's really going to be within like different cities and towns figuring out what works in their area. And I really like that idea of just giving more power to localities. I think that we're seeing that, putting the wrong person in the position of power, can devastate an entire world potentially. I mean, the effects of Trump are being felt all around the globe. But I think that this is a really great opportunity to just try to put more power into cities and towns.
That's a good point, because I think if you have a centralized system, if it's corrupted by the wrong ideas or something like that, well, then it's completely ineffectual across the board.
Mhm.
Versus a distributed system where different ideas are explored in different areas, and the right ones come to the surface, and that's probably a better way to go about it, because I don't know that anybody knows what to do. Like, what is the thing to do? I don't know the answer to that.
It's going to
And
be a lot of different things, because a
yeah,
lot of the things that we're doing in some small or large way are contributing to the problem. So
yeah,
it's not, we can't just switch to electric cars or get rid of straws and hope that everything will be tickety boo, because it's way bigger than that.
no,
Yeah.
and that's a good point too. A lot of people, I think, Anna, you'd mentioned that people just kind of do a thing, oh, I'll buy this like green product or this something, and I've solved the problem because I bought this thing. I donated $1 to this program, and I'm done. I can throw everything away that I want. I can, waste and drive all that I want. And that isn't the right way to think about it. Like, it is an ongoing thing, and it's something that takes more than just putting a couple dollars to something or buying a specific product that has a little sticker on it that says it's good for the planet. Like, no, this is something we have to actively involve ourselves in.
Yeah.
Everybody,
Yeah.
every single person has to actively, consciously be aware of it, and really think about what you're doing and its impact on the planet. And you can't overcome the masses of everybody else, but you could try, I guess.
And it's like we say on this show all the time, you can't just look at things as black and white. You can't say, oh, we got to stop eating meat because all of these cows producing methane and all the production and trucking and blah blah blah. But farming is the same way. All the fertilizers, all the water, all the land that gets raised every season, and all that stuff. That's a lot of land. So everything's having an impact on the environment.
Yeah,
And we've got science that's now created lab grown meat, and we've got genetically modified crops that increase yields and make things bigger with less land and less water and less fertilizer, and people are resistant to these things. And it's like, these are the things that can help us.
no, they're good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, we should be welcoming those kinds of technologies, the sorts of changes. But it's hard when people don't understand things, and it gets ever more complex, much like climate change and things like that. There's so much to look at and so much to think about. And
Yeah, I think the thing to do is to foster an environment of making it open to answer questions that deniers have, rather than getting into name calling contests and stuff.
yeah,
Uh,
have a dialogue,
yeah,
because that's how you change people's minds. Here's the thing: if you call somebody a name or you yell at them, well, you've just shot yourself in the foot, argumentatively speaking. Like, they're never going to change their mind now. In fact, you've actually reinforced their views.
mhm.
So I think it's something that comes with a little bit of nuance, I guess. I don't know
Yeah.
what the word I'm looking for is.
Yeah. I mean,
I
it's
really love,
hard to do. It's hard to maintain a cool head when you get passionate about something, right?
I
That's
think,
where,
engaging people with curiosity is something that I've had success with. Like, really, just trying to like figure out where they're coming from, and like set your opinions aside until you figure out what's important to them and where you can connect. Because yeah, once you start on a tirade about something that you really care about, which I am very guilty of often.
we
I
all
think
are.
I think just like finding that space for human connection is so important, and also just not getting attached to the notion that you're going to change their mind, but more like, okay, maybe if I make a connection that I can maintain, one day down the line, they'll start to change their mind, and then they'll feel like they can be accepted when they do. Like, they're like being a gateway for somebody, because I think for a lot of people, if they don't know anybody who's thinking differently, and if everybody who's thinking differently is being mean, there's not going to be any incentive to change ever. because they're so indoctrinated into a community and a way of thought. I think like anybody who's involved in some kind of like a church or a cult, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to separate yourself from that because that's your community. So show people that you can be their community too. Eventually they're going to recognize the facts. I mean, we're seeing more and more people accepting that, or yeah, accepting that climate change is a reality. Um, and there's only so much that you can deny to science. And if people are going to continue to do that, like I said at the beginning, like it might just be too late for them. But we are the majority who do believe in it, and also believe that it's time to take some dramatic action to address it.
Well, and even if you don't believe I guess from the standpoint of science, like I look at it in a few distinct compartments. There's the data, the analysis of that data, and the conclusions and predictions, and then the course of action. And I think people put all those things together in one bucket and analyze them and deny it all or accept it all. And I think that's the wrong way to do it. But if you're talking with somebody, yeah, I think it's important to plant a seed. And you're never going to change people's minds overnight, especially if people have firmly held beliefs. But eventually, if you plant a seed and cultivate it and slowly change it, it might grow. But then, you look at it and it's like, okay, let's assume that this whole climate change thing is a hoax. Well, a lot of the actions, a lot of the things that people propose, using less resources, reusing things, repairing things, using non-polluting forms of energy, electric cars and things like that. Those are all good things, regardless of whether it's happening or not. So it's an easy sell in that regard.
Yeah, and
I have a friend that bought a hybrid car. He bought a Prius, and he's like, well, I didn't buy this because I'm an environmentalist. I bought it because I'm cheap.
there you go.
And so it costs him nothing. So there may be a different way of convincing people to participate without necessarily confronting them.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that comes up a lot in those conversations is like the loss of jobs, because like fossil fuel industry does employ so many people. And that's where I think one of the real strengths of the Green New Deal lies, is in the concept of a just transition. So just like, making sure to also acknowledge the economic opportunity that transitioning into a regenerative economy presents to people. Especially when, like the coal mining industry kills 10,000 workers a year. It's not like these jobs are safe, it's just that they're jobs. So I think, just like framing it, as an opportunity for everybody is really important too.
Yeah, and with these kinds of jobs, if coal mining, coal becomes a thing of the past, those jobs, yes, they will go away, and coal mines will close, and the cities or towns that are built around that industry will disappear, but something new will come in its place. It's like, I go back to the who laments the loss of the buggy whip manufacturer.
Right.
We don't, because now people are making tires and changing oil and stuff. It's just, things change, and it's okay.
Yeah, there will always be jobs. They'll just be doing different things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, like one of the big goals that we've had with this show is that so there have been studies that show that when you engage people in a civil debate, it strengthens their argumentative skills, which also allows them to think more critically, introspectively about their own stance and question themselves. And if you do that enough with enough people, you stand to change minds or have your own mind changed depending on what side of the fence you land on a particular subject. And so that's why we really hope to talk to a climate change denier. We're about to have an interview with someone who's skeptical of vaccines. We would love to have a chance to sit down and talk with a white nationalist that is capable of saying more than racial slurs, like having an actual discourse and finding out why they think the way they do, and try to figure out a way that we can talk to them on a level that they'll understand and say, like there's a certain sense of logical fallacy to where you're driving your conclusions, and it's like if you just come down on people or punch them or yell at them, you're just driving them into the shadows, and they're thinking the exact same way they were, maybe even a little harder. So it's like this is why we really want to just have conversation.
Yeah, that's what's going to change the world, is people connecting and like just recognizing the humanity in each other. Because that creates kind of the safe space to reconsider how you think, right? Like you said, you're not going to do it if you're getting yelled at.
Right.
I really appreciate that. That's such a noble mission for this show.
Yeah, it will make a lot of enemies because a lot of people don't like that particular method of going about things, but it's
Well, if you're not pissing off at least 10% of people, you're doing something wrong.
exactly.
Well, and we'll probably make some enemies, but we'll make some friends and hopefully change a few minds. I hope, and we'll change as a result of that. I mean, Casey and I, we change our views all the time.
Yep. Oh yeah.
I'm definitely not the person I was when I was 6. I can tell you that.
If you are, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Excuse me, it's time to play with my He-Man toys. I'll
Oh, nice. Yeah, no, this is an important conversation, I think. And it's one that gets people divided. And I don't understand why people are so divided emotionally. It's like this, it's actually pretty clear. We're on this tiny little ball that is very delicate as far as supporting us. And a few tiny changes can make a big difference down the line. Like Casey had mentioned, the butterfly effect. And so I think, it's important to take care of it. And there's a lot of people, even people who deny climate change is a thing, who are very adamant environmentalists because they like to hunt or they like the outdoors or something. And it's like, yeah, we have to protect that. That's important. And this is, oh man, people throw data around so much, and I don't know that it's a data discussion. I think it goes deeper than that. And if you start talking about data, then people can pick it apart because, you start talking numbers, then everybody starts busting out their calculators and they look at it in different ways. I don't, it's not as cut and dried as that. And from the little bit of analysis I've done into climate change and reading some of the papers I've read, the conclusion I've come to is it's very, very complicated. It's not simple. It is not a matter of more CO2 equals higher temperatures. It's an interconnected web of all of these variables all working together, and we're in the middle. And I think we have to be careful. I don't know what the course of action should be, but we have to be careful.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say.
Yeah. And I think just like treating the planet with appreciation, it's a thing that's created and nurtured and sustained us. And why shouldn't we just try to treat it in kind? The planet itself might be a rock, but most things on it are living. Um, so yeah, I really like that visual of just that interconnected web of everything and us being in the middle of it. And I think it's our responsibility to be good stewards. You know, we've evolved to a place where we are very impactful, and I think that impact could be a really positive one if we just, you know, took a step back and reconsidered the way that we interact with all of the living beings around us, including each other humans.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's totally. And you know, humans, other life forms, you know, we should respect them. And it makes me thinking about the power we've achieved with our technological advancement. When the first atomic bomb was detonated, there was a speculation that that detonation could ignite the atmosphere.
Mhm.
And they just went ahead with the test. So, I mean, you know, the fact that we've gotten to that point should tell people how much control we have over the environment and the climate and the planet, and how careful we have to be. Like, with ultimate power comes ultimate responsibility. Is that it? Is that the yeah.
Oh, and launching rockets, doesn't that ever so slightly affect the spin of the Earth?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
It's like, wow, we can build something that slows the Earth down a little bit.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wow.
I
Huh.
mean, that's a big deal. And I think whatever side you sit on, I think it's important to think critically about that and look at your place on this planet and your impact, and be careful and take a little responsibility and try to make a difference. And I think if everybody tried to make a difference, if everybody thought about what they were doing, and you know, when they were going to buy that new thing, just decided not to, or if they're going to throw that cup out into the street, decided not to, you know, or whatever, I think all those little tiny things combined would make this place, this planet, a better place.
Yeah. I mean, really, what a tremendous time to be alive. You know, we have arrived at a place where we can understand the impact that we have, and that we have the power to actually make this world a better place, um, collectively. You know, I think that that's really something that other generations haven't, like, maybe they've thought about it conceptually, but they haven't been faced with the imminent responsibility of doing so. And I find it so exciting. Like, I'm thinking about having kids again, just because, you know, the world might not look the same that it did before. I might not be able to share the things with, you know, my unborn kids that I would, you know, that my parents were able to share with me. They really love the outdoors, and, you know, we'd go up to the mountains to watch the aspen groves change every year. And, you know, there are things that I might not be able to share with my kids, but, you know, I think seeing the kind of communities that are rising out of this, and the new ways of thought, and the new ways of interacting with the planet, um, that's something that I want to share. I think that there will be challenges. I don't think that we're going to fix things overnight. But I think that after any massive, painful transformation, there's a lot of cleanup to do. Um, but I think we're gonna do it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you know, speaking of having kids, there's a proportion of the population that says you shouldn't have kids because of the carbon impact of raising a kid and all that. But then I think, well, the kids aren't a machine. They're not a, you know, they are potential. What if that kid is the one that figures it all out and solves all of the problems? So I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing. And yeah, I'm a little bit skeptical of the alarmism. Like, I don't think it's going to the planet's not going to explode, but there will be challenges and we have to meet them. And yeah, I think I honestly, I have a lot of hope.
Yeah.
Ultimately, for the far future, I think it's hopeful.
And
not necessarily Star Trek yet.
Unfortunately.
Eventually. I mean, they had some hairy times getting to that utopia.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's beauty in chaos. That your kids will find something to, you know, be in awe over. I mean, to some degree, our sunsets are a product of our pollution, and we find them to be quite beautiful.
Mhm.
Yeah, not all of it, of course, but you know, there's definitely some stuff floating around there that we put there, and
Yeah.
lights bouncing off of it, and it looks nice. You know,
That's what makes it pink, right? It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've talked probably over an hour now, and so
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh yeah.
It's good. It's a good conversation, though.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's been great to talk to you guys.
Is there anything that you wanted to plug? Do you have another talk coming up or anything? Or
I don't have any talks coming up, but I would just say that when it comes to coping with eco anxiety and climate grief and all of that, that it's really important to do it on multiple levels. First, to cope with it as an individual, just, you know, like doing something that makes you feel good. Maybe a mindfulness practice. That's something that really helps me. Finding a counselor who understands what you're going through, something like that. But then also expanding that to the community level, to, like, you know, collective disaster preparedness, or just, and also, you know, seeking out just social networks and support that will help with your resilience, but that it doesn't stop there either. That collective action is the only thing that's actually going to feel empowering and also make the difference that we need to see to really have a healthier future. So I think that there are a lot of ways to check out when you live in the industrialized world, but I just really encourage people to not do that, and to see this as an opportunity to explore, to get out of their comfort zones, and to really seek out the kind of communities and see what kind of strengths you bring to this. You know, everybody has something unique to contribute, and it's a really fertile ground for just exploring that and growing as people, both individual and collectively.
Yeah. What's the saying? Be the change in the world that you want to see.
Something like that.
Yeah. I try to live that myself, but you know, yeah.
all right, well,
Getting your voices out there.
Yeah.
Having hard conversations with people. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, like, talk to people, ask questions. I think asking questions is pretty important, and that people are more inclined to tell somebody something, to monologue, when they should be having a conversation. And I think conversation is actually what yields change in people's minds. But I don't know. That's just my thought. And teamtrees.org.
Yeah.
20 million trees, you know, we'll do it.
Yeah.
that sounds awesome.
And if you do want to get involved with, like, an organization around here, I found 350 Seattle and 350 East Side to be pretty great active organizations that can plug you in to a lot of different areas too. And they have potlucks every month, which is just
Nice.
great. I love that, like, you know, I think that any kind of activist organization should include, like, some elements of art and community space and joy, because, you know, we're in this for the long haul, and in order to be sustainable, we've really got to make it a fun and joyful and connected experience. So that's been the organization that I've plugged into, but there are many different ways to get plugged in. So just, like, even searching, you know, Seattle Climate Action can yield a lot of results, or wherever you are listening to this.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. That was good. It was a good conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for deep sink diving with us, as we like to say.
All right.
And,
Take care.
all right. Thanks for coming on, and everybody stick around for the music on the way out.
Have a good night.
Thanks, you too.
And perhaps, if humanity has achieved sufficient maturity to utilize the power of the device, the ultimate age of planet Earth has yet to be witnessed.